We have a new voice on the podcast today, y'all. Ritz is here. Ritz Mpindi is a creative strategist and the founder of Burning Hearts. He's helping us build community at the Let's Go There podcast, and he's on a mission to close the gap between global citizen awareness and action through storytelling that enriches the human spirit. Ritz formed a part of the founding executive team at award-winning creative agency Butterfly Effect, with previous experience as a senior account executive at Fifth Column and a North American PR lead at Publicis Sapient. This week, Ritz is here to turn the tables on me again, y'all. Please enjoy my time with Ritz. Hey, y'all. Let's go there. All right. So I know you're interviewing me, but Ritz, I feel like before we even get started, you need to introduce yourself to our audience.
I do. Hi, everyone. My name is Ritz Mpindi. I manage community at the Let's Go There podcast. I had the distinct pleasure of meeting Carla in Czech Republic, Czechia, through Moonshot platform. Carla was one of my mentors who, guided us through a week of embodied and very cerebral and heartfelt learning. She was just glowing in many ways, and made a really great space for a lot of us to explore deeper topics. I could go on for a long time, but really glad to be here today. Really glad to be interviewing Carla and putting her on the other end of this scenario for a change. I think this will be good.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ritz. Thanks for your trust and thanks for joining us on this crazy mission. I'm so excited to have your talent, your big brain on this. And this is me following your lead. You said our community wanted to hear from me some more. So I said to you, well, then why don't you interview me? Why don't you come on and ask me whatever you want to ask me? And we recently posted some questions out to the community as well in real time today to hear what they wanted to know. And so we have a few questions from them as well. And I'm going to now hand it over to you and let you take lead. You can take this wherever you want.
Yeah, excellent. So I think one of the big conversations that we've been having about, community and I think impact and restructuring how we interact with work as humans is this kind of idea of like, what are the things that you ultimately, Carla, want to leave as a legacy? And how does and has community played like an active role in shaping who you are and how you've come to this point? So I think that's maybe my first question is I kind of want to set that groundwork and have a landscape for how we're approaching this conversation. So if you can share how community both in your personal life and in your professional life has shaped you, that would be really helpful.
Damn, we're starting with the legacy question right out of the gates. That's a big question.
Not wasting time.
Okay, let me give this a shot. At a high level, just to answer first, I want to leave this place better than I found it in some tiny way. I want to pay forward all the opportunity that was given to me. And I still don't know what that looks like, Ritz. I'm still figuring it out. And I'm taking it day by day. In terms of the community, I mean, it takes a village in every aspect. So I have increasingly, over time with age and life experience, appreciated the value of community. Whether that was the moms that saw that I was living on a plane and working these crazy jobs and barely keeping it together, and they were texting me, telling me, what was going on at school. I mean, I have literally received text messages from moms saying, hey, your kid crossed the street in the neighborhood and your nanny was on her phone and didn't realize that your kid just blew through the stop sign on her bike. Like that sort of heads up, that sort of village. Or, hey, there's one of Amelia's teachers texting me at 9 p.m. saying, hey, just so you know, Amelia signed you up for the cupcakes for the Valentine's Day party tomorrow. And just so, there's that aspect of community and village that I've been a part of. There's the Henry Crown community and my classmates, many of which who have been on the podcast. There's the Aspen Institute, which is the larger organization that Henry Crown is a fellowship within, that is very much a community that I'm a part of. There's our actual neighborhood, which I'm reintegrating to and trying to plug back into. There's the nonprofits that I'm a part of, the Contemporary Austin, the artist community that I'm just now starting to get immersed in. All these amazing artists are coming into my life. And in reality, Ritz, this community, right, that we are building together, you and I. And I very much have a vision for this community. I want them to begin to interact with each other and get to know each other and interact with us. So I want to disrupt the podcast format. I don't want this to be one-sided anymore or two-sided. I want us to actually engage our community and have them be part of shaping the direction in which this show goes.
All right, this is a strong start. Yeah, I really love your heart. I think you painted a really helpful picture of how integrated all of this is, and how much we rely on others. This is definitely not in the script, but it just came to my mind. The Super Bowl winning head coach recently was interviewed, actually right after they won the Super Bowl, and this amazing quote came out of it, which was, paraphrasing, but essentially, you cannot have greatness and cannot achieve greatness without the greatness of others.
So true.
Yeah, and I think what you just described is like, you can't live a full life without the fullness of others showing up and stepping in to your life. So yeah, I think maybe from there, I'll go to the question of like, how do you find, curate, and sustain and grow community now at this like crossroads of like your journey as a person and in your career versus earlier in your career?
Yeah. Well, let's talk first about you mentioned the greatness of others. I mean, let's talk about who's behind the scenes putting this podcast together. So whether it's Renee, who has been my assistant for over a decade and is now retired, and I'm pulling out of retirement to help me with this. Stacy at Your Media, who is an incredible talent and has been just a godsend to us, and is handling all the editing and was posting to social for us and doing things that were way outside of the scope of the work to coach me and help me get this off the ground. Whether it's you coming on board as of late to help us build this community, Mahmoud, who is going to be shooting behind the scenes footage for us. I mean, Ritz, I could not pull this off by myself. I'm not a lone wolf. The emperor wears no friggin' clothes. Like, I mean, I need a team in order to execute. I have big ideas, but in order to get stuff done, I need to surround myself with super talented people that can actually make it happen. I know what my limitations are. I would say how that differs now versus early in my career. I think early in my career, I was learning. I mean, I was leading people when I was in my early 20s, running restaurants and bars. And fairly quickly, I started to learn that people have different strengths, different motivations. They're all individuals. Running a bar, running talent for a bar is tough. Folks that are earning tip wage and $2.13 an hour and have other priorities in life, it takes a lot to really understand and tap into their motivation. So that was a great training ground for me, to realize you're only as good as your people. And I could see it translate into the sales of the bar. And so I learned that lesson pretty quickly. As I moved up in my career, that became increasingly important. And inevitably, when things would not go well in my career, it was because I didn't have the right people in the right positions. And a dear friend of mine, Paul Darcy, once said to me that he typically thinks of when he thinks of the place where he's experiencing the most pain, and he seeks out the most talented professional he can and then applies that person to the pain. And it really made me think about it, in terms of how you build teams, and how you leverage people's strengths and deep functional expertise. I'm not an expert in everything, but I need to surround myself with deep expertise. And so I think about it in those terms. And then the last thing I will tell you, Ritz, that I think about in terms of building teams and building community around me is I always used to joke that I would think of myself as Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. And on the fabric of my team, not only did I need functional expertise, but I needed to establish a culture based on different strengths. So I needed my heart, I needed my brains, I needed my courage, and different members of my team represented that. So the Tin Man, the scarecrow, the lion, I needed that. I even needed Toto, so I kind of thought about building community in that way. And I think in terms of where I am now in that thought process is now it's just about surrounding myself with people that I love being around and people that I love. So whatever I do, I want to come bounding out of bed for it in the morning. And you and I were talking about this before we actually started recording, which is I am starting to really take a look at my life because I have filled it with so much stuff that I'm burning myself out. And I am starting to remove the things that don't bring me joy. And I want to be around people that I love, doing things that I love. And I'm getting very, very intentional about that, which means I'm starting to have to say no to things, which is hard for me.
Who in your life is guiding you to be able to come to these realizations? How are you finding this out?
I have lots of guides that show up all the time. Sometimes they're unintended. Like I don't see them coming. Sometimes it's a stranger and they will say something poignant to me. I actually was doing an interview for a publication. Gosh, it was a few years ago. And the person that was interviewing me was like, oh, wow, you've had guides in your life. Because I told my life story through the lens of like all the key moments and key things people said to me along the way that kind of changed my direction or pivoted me or kept me out of trouble. And when she said that, it really hit me, Ritz, because I was like, oh my gosh, you are so right. I've never thought of it that way. But there have been these people that have come into my life at really key moments and just moved me in the right direction. Now, I will say one of those significant guides is Joe Hudson, who's been on the podcast, my coach, my executive coach. Another one would be Trent Niederhaus, who is our therapist. And I, get a lot of guidance from him. I am starting to tap into spiritual guidance. So prayer, meditation, stillness. I'm not very good at it right now. So I'm craving it. I need to go back to it. But I've done a couple of silent retreats that have been very profound and have really guided me. So in that sense, I would say I'm learning to guide myself and listen to myself. That's probably the hardest one right now.
Yeah, you kind of hit it on the head. I was curious, how have you gotten better at discerning the difference between when to listen to your own voice versus when to follow along with the guide?
That's an interesting question. Let me think about that for a second. I don't know if I've said it on this podcast, but a medicine woman recently said to me, your heart cannot lie to you. And that just hit me like a ton of bricks. Again, that she's a guide. She showed up in that moment to tell me, like, trust yourself, right? And so that for me was just like, holy shit, she's right. Like your heart is incapable of lying to you. Like what you want is not wrong. And learning to trust that is really, really hard. Did I answer your question, Ritz, or was there more to it?
I think you did, and I think there's a good segue here. I think this is a big one for a lot of folks who are earlier in their careers and still trying to find their path. Talk a lot about, why do people struggle and thrive in major coastal cities like, New York, LA, SF, DC, Austin. And then also like, why do people struggle or thrive in large matrixed corporate environments versus smaller companies? And I think like dialing in on both of those two things, when we're talking about understanding what your heart desire is and what actually gives you joy and energy, which is a theme that we've already started to build on. Yeah, like in your experience, having served at executive level at a number of tech companies, how have you been able to reconcile existing in a place where you're aware and acknowledging of your own heart while also existing in this entity that may not be interested in that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I cut myself off from my heart to survive those environments for a long time. And it was in 2017 that I realized it was starting to bleed over into my personal life. I was getting numb. And I felt like I was holding a piece of myself back from the people I loved most. I was creating a wall. And that scared the shit out of me, Ritz. Because I thought, wait a minute, that's not how I want to. I'm a super loving person. I was recently told by my coach that when he first met me, he saw immediately that I was a rigid person, and that rigid people are usually people that feel too much and have learned to become rigid to protect themselves. I've since then busted that wide open and damn. So now I let all the love out all the time. And sometimes that gets me into trouble, but I'm like a big time lover. And I think, for years and years, I suppressed that part of myself. I was afraid of it. I was afraid to feel pain. I was afraid to feel grief. I was afraid to feel anger. And in 2017, I set out to reconnect to all that and make a concerted effort to get out of my head and into my body and really let myself feel those emotions again. Now, what's interesting is then I got a whole new wealth of information in the workplace. The signals became very, very strong. The yeses became big yeses. The no's became huge no's. And, the most recent example is I was interviewing for a very significant job. And the person that was interviewing me basically said, this job is yours if you want it. And I can't wait to party with you in Cannes, was the comment. And as soon as the person said it, I was like, I'm out. My body was just like, oh, hell no, I'm out. And I said, the words came out of my mouth on the interview before I could even control them. It was like, I need to pull myself out of this process and I can make recommendations of great talent for this role. And I will never forget it. I called a couple of my girlfriends, my phone friends that are very successful CEOs, one of a publicly traded company. And she said to me, Carla, you need to call them back and take that job. Tell them you made a mistake. She was like, what the hell are you thinking turning down that job? Ritz, I could not help it.
Wow.
There was no denying myself anymore. I couldn't fake it. And it would have been a life-altering job for me and my family. And I'm sorry to report, I couldn't do it. But after 25 years of white-knuckling it, I couldn't do it anymore.
Do you stand by your decision?
I mean, I kind of have to. But yeah. You and I wouldn't be sitting here right now, and that brings me great joy.
Brings me joy too. I think, that's insane. Your body answered for you in that moment.
Yeah. I couldn't even, the words were coming out of my mouth before my brain could understand what was happening. I couldn't believe I said it.
Yeah. I mean, that's your body trying to protect itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Tangent. How did you run into your 2 a.m. friends? So the concept of 2 a.m. friends is there's a small number of friends that you would be able to call at 2 a.m. if something were, going down. So yeah, maybe even tell us a little bit about your 2 a.m. friends and how you established such a connection.
Oh, wow. This makes me feel warm inside because I feel like I have quite a few 2 a.m. friends.
You're blessed.
Yeah, super blessed. There's so much gratitude in me right now thinking about it. Yemi, who introduced us, is one of them. A lot of them have been on this podcast. Now, this is not going to sound very humble, Ritz, but the reason I have 2 a.m. friends is because I am a 2 a.m. friend. Mm-hmm. I am that person. If you called me at 2 a.m., I would pick it up.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. And I've often said to people, like, if you need me to get on a plane, I will get on a plane. Because a lot of my friends are not here in Austin.
Where does that come from?
I feel like it's something that's in me. Now, it could very much be genetic. Like, it could be passed on from my family. My father always had a heart of service. He was always helping people. In his line of work, he very much enjoyed being that person. He's the I got a guy, you know? Like, if you need something, oh, I got a guy. Oh, I got a guy, you know? And so I have a lot of that in me too. But Ritz, I think it's just at my core, it's my essence. It's who I am. You know, Kyle Steed on his podcast talked about knowing he was an artist when he was 5. I feel like I've been a humanitarian since I was 5. You know, like since I was 5, I've wanted to make a difference in the world. Since I was a little bitty girl, I've had this like huge, overwhelming desire to help people and have not known what the hell to do with it.
Were there any specific moments in your development, both professionally and personally, that kind of gave you a concept for where you show up and how you show up in community?
Well, yeah, the Henry Crown Fellowship in a big way. So the purpose of the fellowship is to help leaders go from success to significance to impact and leave the world better. And we go through a series of seminars over 2 years where we are covering everything from ethics to race to global politics to the socioeconomic divide. And by the way, in a room of people, ideally with different perspectives, like-hearted but differently minded people of different political stances. We talk about money, we talk about sex, we talk about all the things you're not supposed to talk about. And there's something that we say as part of the fellowship that we say, but for the fellowship. And so a lot of times I feel a huge responsibility to the fellowship, to honor the fellowship and do good. So I think that does impact how I show up. I think the work that I've been doing over the last few years is certainly impacting how I'm showing up. I am not there yet, but I'm getting closer and closer to my most authentic expression. Yeah.
I'm glad you said what you said. Take us back to working at that bar and kind of those humble beginnings. Tell us about some of the principles that you picked up during that time, about yourself, about like understanding what kind of person you are, about understanding how you best function within a team, within a community, all that stuff.
Yeah. Well, let me contextually, I will say I was putting myself through architecture school and I was broke. Broke. I mean, I remember, I'm not proud of this, but I remember writing a hot check at the grocery store sort of thing, you know, in order to eat. And, you know, having to deal with paying the $25 fee when it bounced because I just needed to figure out my meal. And so I was super broke, but I was also super ambitious. I had like hustle and I was coin operated. I wanted to make money. And there was something innate in me that saw the upside in broken businesses. And as I was learning design thinking in architecture school, I was applying it to the businesses. So in effect, I was remodeling businesses like houses, and I would have a very visual perspective of the P&L. I would see the P&L and be able to see what the opportunities were in it to turn it around. In terms of how I showed up then, a lot of it is similar to how I show up now. It was, you know, big ideas, bold thinking, strong opinions. And I got a lot of followership. Like people would be excited by it. And I was also polarizing. Some people would not be excited by it. You know, I got my first taste of that. But yeah, I began turning around businesses and I started to make a lot of money. And that was super motivating and inspiring to me. And so much so that, when I was recruited to go to Dell, I dropped out of school because I was like, okay, for me at this point, my health was starting to suffer, but I also was like, I'm just ready to get going. Like I'm ready to get on with my life, start my career and get going.
I love that. So you've always had that hustle, yeah?
Yeah, big time. And that's a relentless bear. Like, I remember being on the phone with one of my girlfriends one time, and she shares this same kind of relentless hustle. And we were both like, why, why do we have this within us? Like, it's exhausting at times. And I would say it's, part of my healing process. I've started to let go of some of that, Ritz. Hence the ability to say no to a job and not be bought out, that I knew wasn't right for me or for my soul. But because there was a time and a place where I would have sold out like in a heartbeat for it. So I'm getting better, but it is that relentlessness. And I don't know if it comes from being an immigrant. I don't know if it's in my DNA. I don't know if it comes from being broke, but it's in me.
I think this theme of rest and I think a lot of what you're trying to build and what you are building with the co-effect and with this podcast has to do about holistic health.
Mm.
Yeah. How do you have a concept for what rest and regular replenishing looks like?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm deeply inspired by an old piece that the Harvard Business Review did called The Corporate Athlete.
Hey.
Which talked a lot about, in order to survive and thrive as an executive, you have to treat yourself like an athlete. And a lot of C-level folks get that right in terms of the body part of it. Like most C-level folks have like a pretty strict fitness regimen. Most of them have some sort of nutrition plan. But what they don't always have is the spirit and the emotional. So the mental and emotional part of it. Which is what the corporate athlete talks about as well. So the corporate athlete basically says you have to take care of yourself, mind, body, spirit. And then to your point, you have to, like elite athletes, know how to rest and recover, which most C-level folks don't really know how to rest and recover, especially if they're entrepreneurs and they're founders, because it's their baby. At least that's what I found. And so this really inspired me. And I would say the first part of my being a C-level executive, I was really dialing in the body part too, right? So I was running half marathons. I was working out with a trainer. I was getting my nutrition dialed in, but my sleep was shit. My adrenals were shot. I had no spiritual practice, no meditation. I had no therapy whatsoever. Did not want to go there on the emotional side. And I certainly didn't know how to rest. I was wearing myself out in every single job. I'll never forget it. My husband and family, we drove to Telluride one summer, and we would take the kids to Telluride every summer. And that's a 17-hour drive from Austin. And I will never forget it. We stopped in Santa Fe on the drive. I slept from Austin to Santa Fe. We got to Santa Fe. I went to bed and slept a full night. Then we got it back in the car and drove to Telluride, and I slept that whole leg. So I basically slept all the way through. That's how much I was wearing myself out. So what ended up happening is in 2017, I realized, okay, the emotional part hasn't been dealt with. And that's when I realized I wanted to reconnect with my heart. And that's when Joe Hudson appeared in my life, which then led me down a spiritual journey, which showed up post IBM. And then the rest is now what I've almost been forced to do over the last few years. And that has been wild because that's the last part of this, Ritz. And it's what I'm not good at. I just told you before this call that I'm kind of falling into my old pattern of overscheduling and overcommitting myself. So, but the rest is the most important part. And I was even listening this morning to a podcast with Dr. Stacy Sims, who's done a lot of research around women's health and female athletes, because what we're finding is a lot of the stuff that they're recommending for men, not so great for women. And one of the things she talks about is how important sleep is for women, for our recovery, and for our hormones and everything else. So I think rest for me is the last frontier to really get sorted. And I know I've droned on for a while here, but the last thing I will say is I don't know if you've done your human design. Are you familiar with human design?
No.
I feel like it's common in your age group. Check
Huh.
it out. It's very woo woo. It's you have to know kind of your birthplace and birth time and all that stuff, but it is frighteningly detailed and accurate. And there are different types of human designs, and one of them is manifestor, which is what I am. And somebody, so basically someone who creates things and has kind of big bold visions. And when I found out I was a manifestor, the person that was telling me about it was like, the most important thing for a manifestor is rest. And I was like, oh, really? And she was like, yeah, rest. You need rest. And I was recently talking to someone about kind of getting back out there. And he said to me, well, are you rested? Are you sure you're rested? And that I found that to be really, really fascinating that this notion keeps coming back up. And you're even bringing it up today.
Yeah, the universe has a funny way of speaking. Yeah, I think this concept seems to show itself in every discipline. I think Rick Rubin has a really, in the creative act and a lot of his other work has been very explicit about the importance of doing nothing or having free time and how that's critical to being able to have a perspective for the creative work that you're going to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so like it's almost cheating the process or to miss out on enriching it if we're not living lives that are worth that are full of these things that allow us to come to these solutions with the creativity. If we're not watching someone climb a mango tree in a tropical island or country and then coming back to some supply chain issue and thinking about it differently, these things are all connected.
Ritz, my biggest ideas come to me in moments of rest. Whether that's like a long walk, or whether it's a digital detox. Actually, my biggest ones come during digital detoxes. But I would totally agree with Rick Rubin's assertion that is a requirement of creativity, which, by the way, even if people don't perceive themselves as a creative, everybody is a creative. So, we all have to solve problems, which requires creativity. And during this inflection point of AI, we're all creatives. We now have this tool where we're going to be able to create whatever we want. So we're now all creatives. So yeah, I think rest is critical to the creative process.
It is. It's also a great segue talking about AI and also digital detoxes and really like how this next generation of the workforce is going to survive, thrive, interact. What are the things that you would be filling your field guide for your children's careers with? What are the things that you want to, if you're going to leave a legacy, a playbook for not only your children, but the next wave of CMOs or executives in Gen Z in terms of how to navigate, how to live in community, how to understand how to be a part of a digital community, when to, when not to. Do you have any thoughts or kind of perspectives that you think are worth sharing?
I do. Do you mind if I turn this question around on you first?
Oh,
I'm so curious.
oh man, answering my own question. I think there are some things that come up. From my perspective, I think I'm part of the last generation that remembers what life was like before we were all very digitally interconnected. I was one of the first sixth graders in 2006 or 7 to have a Facebook. When that
Wow.
was, yeah. And
Breaking
so,
the rules.
yeah, my older brother made it for me. So I needed some help. But yeah, I think what I've seen and what I'm experiencing myself is this really hard to define line between optimization and total like disruption in a negative sense of our like brain scaffolding and our emotional scaffolding with the use of all of these tools. Um, what I'm seeing is I think the great challenges of late millennials and Gen Z in the business world, as much as from a holistic standpoint, is going to be learning how to pass down the like core competencies of interacting as a human. It's a really crazy world we live in where soft skills are going to jump in value because the commodification of hard skills. Yeah, like we said, ChatGPT 4.0 just came out with an image generator that's so good. Now it's making designers who were already good elite, and it's turning everyone into a designer. And so being able to be offline and to know how to navigate and not over engineer human interactions with technology are some of the like bigger questions that we're going to have to answer. I definitely want to think a little bit more about maybe what things I might leave in a playbook for some of my nieces and nephews who are, headed into elementary school. But I do think like the winners of tomorrow are going to be people who grew up in this age of technology with limited access at the start, that were able to develop a lot of these skills, these like soft skills organically, and then able to be integrated into the technology early enough that interacting with it is still second nature. I think those are going to be the winners of tomorrow.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
got some more kind of cooking in my brain, but I'll stop there.
Okay. Well, I want to hear about it. I would agree. So I think from my perspective, what's old is new again. The pendulum swings, right? And so I think and I've talked about this on the podcast with Pete Cadence. I think the critical skills are the ability to make eye contact, right? The ability to connect, to form a relationship, to communicate effectively, curiosity, creativity, the ability to establish human connection. These are the skills. What's old is new again. Aristotle and Plato felt like the highest expression of humanity were the arts. I think that could be the case. I think that's going to be, while AI is really damn good, you can tell the difference between AI generated art and human generated art, right? And so there is a feeling you feel when something is generated by a person. And so that I think is going to be super interesting and is super exciting. I think this thing cuts both ways. There's definitely risks. I like what you're saying about keeping the exposure to a limit, in particular when the brain is forming and when kids are young, and working on those other soft skills, the social skills, if you will. But I also envision a world where, you as a sixth grader could create a feature-length film while on the bus to school, right? But if you didn't have the social skills and the relationship skills to articulate to everyone what you had just done, then what's the point? It won't go anywhere.
Wow.
Think about the access that's going to provide. What if a young kid out of Appalachia, creates the solution, or the solution to a disease or a significant intractable problem in our lives? It's like having a team at your fingertips.
It really is. I have a scenario to throw at you.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say we're 5 years in the future, or 5 or 10 years in the future. Elon Musk has successfully rolled out Neuralink.
Oof. Keep going. I'm afraid. Keep going.
Oh yeah, it's going to get a little bit more invasive. And so now, with the help of artificial intelligence, the help of AI, we're able to have social assistants in our brains that help decode and translate verbiage during intense conversations, right? So, let's say 10 years from now, I'm having some heated conversation with my child, and we both have Neuralink in. And, you know how it happens. Sometimes we have conversations and we can only help but hear what we want to hear, which usually is something that is inflaming. And Neuralink is helping translate the intended message from one user to the other, which could be beautiful, right? Like we could really see each other in the way that right now there's a lot of testing going on in the military and in the and in other controlled spaces with like using mushrooms and MDMA to help people recover from PTSD and find places of commonality. That's beautiful. But then the potential downside would be, well, are we going to be still learning these hard skills that we would be able to accomplish without the help of Neuralink? So the question is, in a scenario like that, if you have the option, or say for your family or for your, people who are under your leadership and purview, which route would you take? Would you allow it, or would you go the old-fashioned way?
Okay, so this one is one I struggle with, because as much as I want to keep an open mind to what you're saying, and as much as I could see the potential scientific benefits, like potentially getting off all pharmaceuticals, because there is a AI fix that can be implanted that can even change how your genes turn on and off, or how cancer cells respond in your body. Like, as much as I want to keep an open mind, every cell in my body, much like that job interview reaction, is saying, fuck no. That is a bad idea. Every cell in my body is saying that is the beginning of the end. When we actually start to put this inside of our body. And I could be wrong, right? It doesn't have to be binary. There could be technologies that come into play that do what I just told you, that help stave off things like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, or cure cancer, or prevent cancer, or help somebody with bipolar, without the need for chemical intervention. So I want to keep an open mind, but I will say my intuition and my very visceral, physical, in my body response to that is no, bad idea.
I'm likely more in your camp than the other camp, for the sake of, I think, at this point, I think it's a recycled POV that many people hold. But like the ability to do hard things unassisted is extremely valuable.
Yeah.
Which I think kind of gets me back to that other question about what are the things that people who will be in the workforce and in political leadership in the next 40 years are going to have to face. I think this is the conversation around TikTok, and the conversation around, like, it's the geopolitical conversation around like digital psyops between China and the US. We're talking about what are the hard skills and soft skills that each generation is developing? How are their brains being formed? And like, are we developing or allowing a generation of non-resilient, fragile people to develop through the online communities that are being built on TikTok? Are brains going to mush, essentially, is the hard question. So when things are analog, or when things are a pressure situation, will the people who are 10 now and will be 40 later have the mental fortitude to handle decision making under pressure without some sort of soothing mechanism? And I'm not an expert, but my way too early guess is no.
So Ritz, I have a question for you, and I'm making a big assumption here, but let's assume you want to have kids. You're raising kids in the future. Yeah, that's what I thought. You're raising kids in the future. When are you going to give them their first smartphone? Or screen, if you will.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think about this a little bit, not too much. I think a lot about at what age can they decipher how to use which tools, and also like their social circumstances, which I think a lot of it has to do with like group parenting. Like if I'm in a community where we've all decided that our kids get sub 3 hours of screen time a day, it's way easier to keep that rolling. if I'm the only holdout parent on the Upper West Side or in Park Slope, Brooklyn, and my kids are seeing everyone else get to use screens at 7, they're going to resent me. They're going to rebel, and they are going to be sneaking tech. So then it becomes this game, I guess, in my head of how can I be a Sherpa walking alongside? And like, I think just like that 10 to 12 age feels super important. I just think about the digital boom that happened when I was a kid and how most of our parents just had no idea really like how integrated our lives were becoming with video games and technology. So I would try to be really hands on and also make space for personal conclusions during that 10 to 14 range. I'd be pretty defensive about screen time and being very limited before 10. Yeah, I think it's easy enough with programming. Well, easy. I think it's simple enough with programming, like that child's experience from like school, pickup, social things to not have to have a phone for a while.
Yeah.
But around 10, it starts getting harder. And if there's like 4 kids or 3
Yeah.
kids, that's a lot.
Well, I also think it may not be binary. It was interesting. I had this really strong connection with a cab driver in London, and we were in the car together for about an hour and a half, and we had a really deep conversation. Sam, hi Sam, if you're listening.
Oh,
And he really inspired me. He was a father of 2 young girls, and he one of the things that he said, which I loved, is he said, "I want them out in nature. I want their feet dirty. I want them climbing things. I want them, getting messy. I want them to get a bump and bruise every now and then." And I loved that. So I also wonder, Ritz, too, how much of it is less about what you restrict, which is important and govern, but more about what you make sure. What are the key experiences, to your earlier question, that we want to make sure that these kids get? And I think time in nature is a big one. And that's tough in some more urban parts of the world. But I mean, New York has Central Park. There's great parks in Brooklyn too, but just like feet in the dirt, man, feet in the dirt.
it's a game changer. I mean, I think about that all the time. Think about like physical note taking, reading, painting. Like there were so many things that I felt, like we didn't grow up in spoils of riches. We didn't grow up like wanting a meal either. But like there were so many riches of my experience growing up because my parents took us back to the Central African Republic where my dad was teaching. I got to climb mango trees. I got in trouble. We were like chasing stray dogs. Like I had this crazily rich early couple of years that has made storytelling and like marketing feel second nature to me through
Mm,
just playing.
mm,
And so, yeah, I do think there's like a real beauty to like, oh, get your feet dirty, paint splotches maybe where you shouldn't. Yeah, like play the instrument all the wrong ways.
yeah.
So important.
Explore, explore, explore. The other thing, we're talking a lot about youth, but we are upon the biggest inflection point that our generation, this whole humanity will see with AI. Work as we know it is going to completely be disrupted and evolve. And I think part of the important thing too is this isn't just going to affect the younger generation that's coming up. This is affecting people my age. This is affecting the generation behind me and then yours and so on. And so I think we all need to be thinking about what we want our relationship with technology to be, how we want to prepare ourselves for the future, what the key skills are, what we bring to the table, what our unique gifts are. We all need to be thinking about it.
Here's a question for you off of that. Are there any things that you'd be hoping to learn from millennials and Gen Z as we're going through this like industrial revolution?
Hmm. Well, all the time, by the way. It's part of why I surround myself with people like you. Um, so I'm constantly asking what y'all think. Um, there's just so many things. Like I think probably the most thing I'm most curious about is perspective. Like, how do you see the world that we live in right now? How do you see the geopolitical landscape? Um, what do you need to thrive? Um, what do you want out of life? Um, These are the things I'm curious about.
Matters of perspective.
Yeah, perspective.
Are there any like philosophies that guide you as you're traversing this for yourself, thinking about where you fit in this next iteration of work, where you fit in this next iteration of leadership, this next era?
I've been doing a lot of reading of texts from different spiritual leaders and also the silent retreats. So Pema Chodron is one that I glean a lot from. Adyashanti is a non-dual spiritual teacher. He has since retired, but all of his stuff is available digitally. I find the different faiths fascinating. So I'm pulling a lot from that, Ritz. And like I said before, getting back to meditation practice, getting back to prayer, getting back to self, getting back to center. But yeah, during this time, which seems like really scary with everything that's going on in the world. I mean, stock market crashing this morning, or basically dropping 7 percentage points. I'm really drawing from the spiritual right now and from spiritual teachers. And I think what it's given me is just a strong knowing, a deep knowing that everything is going to be okay. The other thing I draw so much inspiration from, and I'm swear I'm like a poster. I'm constantly advertising for this podcast, but the telepathy tapes has blown my mind. And for those of you that haven't listened, let me apologize in advance for the 10 hours of your life that you're about to lose binging this series. But and I don't want to give too much away, but I will say it's chronological, so it's important that you start from the beginning and work your way through. But man, it is so beautiful, Ritz. It's so beautiful. And those are the sorts of things I'm drawing from right now.
Yeah, I think you kind of touched on something that I think everyone's experiencing in their own way, which is that things are hard right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a very fascinating social moment because essentially the rhetoric has been out for over 3 years now. And like the Fed and a lot of early indicators in 2022 were telling us that it was going to be a really difficult 15 to 18 months.
Yeah, if not longer.
And they're forecasting another difficult 15 to 18 months.
Yeah.
And so, I think there was a question from our audience about what keeps you going through the toughest of times.
Yeah. So like I said, a lot of the spiritual teachers for sure. Prayer. I think the other thing, Ritz, is, and this is like such an old adage, but the best way to help yourself is to help somebody else. So whether that's through nonprofit work or, helping somebody that's going through a tough time and just being there for them, or, somebody reaching out and needing career advice, that seems to soothe the soul tremendously, to be of value in this world, to be of service. And then obviously my physical and emotional practices too, like back to the corporate athlete. So staying fit, dialing in nutrition, getting great sleep, doing the work from a therapy perspective, working on the relationships that mean the most to me, spending time with people that I love and that I find inspiring, and not spending time with the people that bring me down, which is tough too, That's a hard one, but that's important too. Huh?
Let's double click on that. I think this is one of the skills that I hear and see, I think is one of the like more critical things in the 20s and 30s, those early years professionals. Yeah. Can you give us a bit of like a crash course workshop on how to identify when someone is taking energy out of you, and how to kind of deal with that, if that's like a conversation that we need to have with someone, if it's not worth the conversation? How are you going through that experience of protecting your energy?
Yeah. Here's the hack. If you feel tired or heavy after you've been with someone, that's a sign. This assumes that you're in your body and not your head. So it requires a certain level of embodiment, Ritz. If you are on the hamster wheel and just in your head and going through the motions, and not really listening to your physical state and to your heart, then you may not pick up on it. But if you are tuned in and plugged in and embodied, there are circumstances, there are people where you will feel heavy or depleted or tired. That's the sign. And then to answer your question, I think it's important to have the conversation if it's somebody that you want in your life. So let's say it's a family member, and you want to continue to have them in your life. Then maybe there's a boundary that needs to be set. Maybe it's pointing to something. Or maybe you just express to them vulnerably how they're making you feel in that moment. Now, the key learning for me, though, Ritz, is that it's not our job to change other people. Authenticity is about expressing yourself, but then you have to disattach from the outcome. You have to unhook and not try to control somebody else or change somebody else. They're going to do what they're going to do. And then if they keep doing the thing that makes you tired or heavy, feel heavy, or just not good in general when you're around them, then you have a decision to make.
And where does prayer fit into all of this? Because you've mentioned that a couple of times.
I've asked for guidance before, and it's amazing how it shows up. Yeah. And it doesn't matter what your religious belief is. I would even say if you're an atheist, give it a shot. Right? Even if you don't believe in God or anything like that, you certainly don't have to be religious to pray. You could be asking yourself, right? But I do think asking for guidance and staying still enough to actually listen to what comes back.
I think that's a scary thing for a lot of people. Making the space to be silent and to let the mind mellow out.
Yeah.
I was having a conversation last night with some friends. We were actually talking about kind of religiosity, prayer, all of these things. And one of the things that came out of the conversation that I thought was super interesting that might be worthy to share here is this functional reality to prayer and meditation, specifically meditation on scriptures or written things, right? So there's almost this feeling of spiritual woo, which is I'm going to spend this time and something's going to magic is going to turn on and happen. And sometimes the God is in the details,
I love that part.
Right? Which is people are starting to do studies and starting to come back understanding why are in law school or in other practices, why are my Jewish compatriots doing much better or whatever? And it's well, they're memorizing the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible. And they've been doing that for a long time. And so their comprehension skills and long-term, short-term memory skills and contextual visual memory skills are super high because they're super practiced because they've been meditating on these scriptures for a long time. And so there's a functional benefit. And similar thing with prayer, right? It can sound very spiritual and woo and be transformed by the renewing of your mind, says Paul or the Apostle Paul or Saint Paul. Functionally, realistically, there is something that does change in our brain wiring when we pay attention to the things that are lighter and we fix our focus on them.
Yeah. Have you read the book Breath by James Nestor?
No, but it sounds like I need to.
Yeah, it might mess with you a little bit. It messed with me, but it's all about breathing. And one of the things he talks about in that book is that the ideal, and forgive me if someone fact checks me, I might get this wrong, but I think I recall that the ideal sequence of breath is 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out. Like that's the best state to be in. It's has all these sorts of benefits that are wild, like from your blood work to your cholesterol to everything. And what many of us have done over time is we've forgotten how to breathe. And we breathe through our mouths and we hold our breath and we don't breathe deeply enough and all these things. And it has all these ramifications. But what he shared, which I found so interesting, is that in a variety of religious practices, the 4 count was part of the breathing, whether it was Gregorian chants or Buddhist monks or there was like a myriad of other Native American practices where he talks about the 4 count is consistent in all these different religions and all these different prayers and all these different forms of chanting, which I thought was super fascinating. So to your point, it's like, even if you don't believe, there's actual physical benefits to it.
Yeah, it's such a funny thing because obviously the religious and spiritual space is packed in with so many like large emotional, positive or negative triggers, which actually brings back to this question. At what point were you did your curiosity overtake maybe some of the like aversion to considering spirituality and these types of things as like a pursuit?
Well, I was always very curious as a little kid. So I grew up in a household with an atheist and an agnostic. My parents told us that religion was a personal choice and that they were happy to support our exploration and take us anywhere we wanted to go or let us go to church, synagogue, temple, you name it, with any of our friends. And I think I mentioned on the podcast before, I grew up in a really religiously diverse town. Dallas had everything under the sun. And so, or at least a significant portion of major religions represented. And in going to all these different places, like every Christian denomination, going to Unitarian, going to different Jewish temples and synagogues, it was fascinating to me, the common threads. And then that was reinforced when we traveled with our kids and we inadvertently hit all of these major religions' holy weeks. And we were going to Hindu and Muslim and Buddhist temples. And then we were getting exposure to Catholicism during Semana Santa. And it was like, wow, there's a common thread in all of these. Even like the structure of the Buddhist church as it compares to the Catholic church and the lighting of candles and the incense. And it was just like, so I've always been fascinated by that, Ritz, the connectivity of it all. So I've never, well, I shouldn't say never, because there have been moments. Actually, as a kid, I got exposure to some folks that held high positions in their respective religious practices who didn't necessarily model the sort of behavior that I thought was in keeping with their religion, specifically racism. And I saw that at a young age, and that turned me off big time. And so early on, like at 14, I realized that human beings are fallible and that your belief is up to you. So you're not worshiping the pastor or the minister or the rabbi. That's not what it's about. And so that's, or at least from my perspective. And so I was able to kind of unhook from some of that baggage at a very young age and recognize that it wasn't about the individuals that were involved in that faith.
Yeah, I think what you're describing is something that takes some people, maybe some people live their entire lives with that still in place. It's really hard to disconnect from that. And that's really special that you're able to do that at 14.
Yeah.
Which actually is also a great segue. Another question from the LinkedIn community was, what would you advise the younger version of you to think about, to consider, to know, not just necessarily in the space of kind of spirituality and religion, but maybe more in general as you think back on your experience?
I would tell her that everything's going to be okay. And that she's perfect just as she is, and she has nothing to prove. And that it's okay to love big. And yeah, she's going to get hurt. And that's okay. It's better to feel it, all the good and the bad, than to not feel it all.
That's really beautiful. Uh, yeah, I'm getting like a picture of you in that bar, just like telling everyone what to do and slinging drinks and giving somebody a power cord for this, that, and the third. And
That's about right.
yeah. Um, and like also, I think a lot about what you just blessed your former self with in that corporate environment too.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's its own adventure. That's its own wild, wild west. Which I think some folks in our community were also curious. Like, what did you wish you would have been able to accomplish at IBM that you accomplished at other companies? It seems very specific.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, my tenure there was so short. I didn't really get a chance to show the world how cool that company really is. The amount of innovation and the impact that IBM has had and continues to have on the world, in particular as it pertains to AI, that was the heartbreaker for me. Like not being able to take that message to market in the way in which I felt like would just blow people's minds and really help them understand what an asset IBM is in the world, and the important role that it plays. I think that for me was the toughest. That and just leaving the people. IBMers are incredible, Ritz, and the outpouring of support that I still continue to get all these years later. Man, I love IBMers. They're incredible. They're super hardworking. In many instances, they're multi-generational. They truly care. They're smart. Hell, there's at the time that I was there were 5 Nobel laureates on the research team. Like, just take a second to think about that. So that for me was probably the hardest part. Not really getting to see that through was a heartbreaker.
Yeah. No, I hear you. Yeah, this is stirring up a couple of questions in me. I'll try to pick the one. You said something earlier about being able to tell the story of IBM and made me think a lot about the conversations that are happening in the marketing field as AI continues to advance rapidly. I want to hear your perspective on the future of brands.
Future brands. Whew. Well, I have strong opinions about the future of marketing, which I think pertains to the future of brands. And it's tied to what I said about what's old is new again, which is since the advent of MarTech and all of this data, marketers have lost their way. And, we've forgotten that our most important role is to build a relationship between the brand and the customer or client. And marketing, I've also been known to say that marketing, since its inception, as far as I can tell, has been a taker. It takes privacy, it takes time, it takes dollars away from the clients and client. But the best brands, Ritz, actually understand that marketing is generous. And so they give before they take a single cent from you. They are generous. And so for me, the future of brand is understanding that. I also can't help but think that everything that we talk about on this podcast, you could apply to a brand. Like, what is the most authentic expression of a brand? How do you strip down to that? How do you vulnerably show the brand in its purest sense to your clients and customers? Warts and all. What would that look like? What sort of loyalty or connection would that drive? Because no one is perfect. No brand is perfect. So I think about that a lot. I don't know if that answered your question or if that's what you were getting at, but that's how I think about it.
Yeah, I think there were 2 major points that I'm picking up on, which is marketers have lost their way in terms of understanding what they serve, which is to create a great relationship between the brand and those who it serves, its community or audience. And then like the best brands understanding that marketing is generous. I don't know if there's any examples top of mind that like really kind of embody that relationship between the brand itself, the products that it makes, or the services that it gives, and the community of people that benefit from it. Yeah, I don't know if there's anyone that you'd want to shout out at the moment.
I don't know. What about you? What comes up for you? I mean,
Yeah,
there are a lot of brands I like, but is there anybody that stands out to you?
yeah. So I hang out in the sports marketing space quite a bit. And so I think there are two brands. One that's been doing it for, I think, 12 years now, really excellently. And the other that's on the come up. And so the first one is Gymshark.
Mm-hmm.
They seem to be really dialed in on their ability to understand, to hear super clearly what's happening in the wider cultural context, understand where they fit in, and then leveraging the resources to do things that actually impact people's lives in a positive way and speak to the realities that the customer is experiencing or the people in their community are experiencing. So they had like a campaign where they got people to send in like old used, or I think actually what they did was they collected formerly confiscated knives from knife crime in the UK and smelted it all down and turned it into gym equipment and blessed communities with that.
Whoa, that just gave me chills.
Yeah. Yeah, they've got a really great team over there. I think Pure Sport is another one it's like a smaller, it's an up and coming like fitness running brand. And then even in New York City, we've got brands like Bandit that are really speaking to the reality of folks who are serious and committed to running, but it's not all the performance running club. It's this sort of lifestyle thing where people are interested in the social aspect and are interested in being a part of a community that like loves good coffee and loves the social aspect of it, but still wants to views this fitness as a lifestyle, this fitness choice as a lifestyle, this running club as a lifestyle. And obviously the running clubs really took off, but Bandit's been at the headwind of that for the last 18 months. And it's been really fascinating to watch them just continue to grow. They started in New York. They have 2 shops in New York, a third coming, and they just opened in LA. It's really cool to see. So I think there's a lot of brands that are realizing now that community is not just about customer satisfaction, and it's not about engagement digitally. It's about having, like we're talking about, this like organic existing relationship based on shared values and experiences. What we're talking about is culture.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, you're so right, Ritz. And as you're talking, I'm actually thinking of like all the brands I've watched get destroyed by metrics.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking of some really great ones, and I don't want to name names because I don't want to do any more harm to them.
Mm-hmm.
But it is so sad. I've watched so many fantastic, beautiful, amazing brands that were growing like mad. And for whatever reason, call it a board, an investor, a strategy, leadership, I've watched metrics destroy them. And that's tough to watch.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because like we sometimes lose our way when the North Star changes. I'm thinking of, and I won't name them by name, but I think there was a a major sportswear apparel company that just recently reinstated a CEO who has a long history of having served at the company from bottom to top.
Yeah, he's a friend.
Oh, and I loved listening to his initial interviews and things of that nature.
Yeah, he's salt to the earth.
Right? It seems like it. I'm glad to be hearing that my
Wonderful human. He's a wonderful human.
Right? Because like what had happened essentially was this leaving the identity of the brand behind before he came. They hired someone who had all the right metrics and stats and understood, had the roadmap to making this more of a D2C thing. But at the end of the day, for that brand, we are talking about that. It's a skin contact.
Yeah.
This is a brand that found its identity serving the unorthodox.
Yeah.
Making tennis players wear neon colors.
Yeah.
Like uniting a running community in Portland, Oregon, right? It's also incredibly human, and it forgot itself, and it reflected in the numbers.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to stress great Great brands grow businesses. Great metrics do not.
Great brands grow businesses. I think this is like flipping the paradigm on what good marketing is, or at least clarifying it as I think maybe one of the things that I think needs to happen in the next, from jump. I think I'm still part of too many conversations where people believe that marketing is flash. I actually want you to check me on this statement, because I've been saying it around a little bit and I don't know if it's actually smart to say or not, but my take recently has been that all good marketing is growth marketing, whether short-term or long-term.
Say more about that. What do you mean?
My understanding at this point in my career is the be all end all, the output that any stakeholders are looking for when they're engaging myself, any comm shop that I'm a part of, or anyone else, is marketing for the sake of growth. And I'd maybe divide that into, for the sake of simplification, 2 metrics. Does it make us money or does it make us famous? Yeah, what it kind of comes down to for me as I'm, continuing to have these experiences is like, how are we growing the value that the end user or customer or community member is experiencing, whether that's by volume or quality of life? How are we affecting their quality of life?
Yeah.
And then for the brand, like, does that result in more sales? And does that result in like a positive reputation, not just from like PR placements, but from actually your community being your biggest walking billboard?
Yeah.
So that's kind of,
you'd be surprised how many business leaders don't get this. And, I want to be clear. I'm not your typical marketer. I grew up in sales. Like, I am coin operated. I'm all about growing a business. And the fact that people don't understand this is kind of shocking to me. I have watched so many executive teams stare spreadsheets and PowerPoints down and to the right.
Say more.
So without asking the questions you're asking, how does the customer feel about us? How are we doing? What do they need? Are we solving their problems? How easy are we to work with? Are we enjoyable to work with? There's the old stories about Walmart. Whenever their numbers would suffer, all of their executives would cancel all their meetings and go out into the stores, which I think is beautiful, beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
And scrappy as hell, And so one of my triggers being on executive teams is when the numbers are bad, more meetings are called, more spreadsheets are created, more PowerPoints are created, as if somehow we're going to stare the numbers up and to the right, when it's actually just pointing to the fact that we need to ask more questions.
A lack of curiosity.
Yeah, you nailed it, a lack of curiosity.
Yeah, I heard somewhere else that sometimes, and I think this is happening in the tech industry right now. It's actually fascinating to watch. There's all these public statements coming out. In my PR background, I'm just reading through these press releases and trying to sift what's the message that's being sent. There's like 2 messages that seem to be kind of popping out from like a lot of these tech CEOs, which is so the outside message is, we're thinning layers of bureaucracy. And we're really doubling down on, employees being here for performance. And it's like expected in this environment, right? The deeper message that I feel like I'm receiving is, especially when it comes to more meetings being called, is like actually what we need is people who are not afraid to look at what's going wrong and address it. Yes.
Yeah, talk about it.
Address it.
Safety.
Accountability, like straightforwardness. And then the other, which I think, I don't think necessarily is where I want to go in this conversation, but acknowledging the fact that like, this is an environment that calls for builders. So even in the consulting kind of field, a lot of this, like, you have to be able to make something. This is the moment for makers. This market is the moment for makers. And so for a lot of us who have, I think, gotten by in our career being able to talk, it's a call to be a creator. You have to pick up a paintbrush. You have to upskill and learn a new thing. Because the truth is, at least in my opinion, about like, I look at things very much through a geopolitical lens. This isn't a moment for, I'll speak specifically to the American economy, where a lot of institutional investors and a lot of companies are trying to understand how much value they can create at the turn of a dime. And so that's the message that I'm seeing from these tech CEOs is, hey, we're not playing games. It was nice, but we're not at the luxury of being nice anymore. Everyone needs to be able to start producing at the drop of a hat. And so that's who we're looking for. And that's who we need to depend on. And it's scary.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which gets into Ray Dalio's kind of summaries about how power changes hands, the New World Order, though, all those things. I don't think I want to get into all of that, but that's kind of what I'm seeing. I'm curious to see if you have a perspective, kind of on that topic as it relates to marketing, kind of how tech CEOs are leading, and maybe giving a roadmap or like a landscape picture for how to have context. How does the average person in this workforce have context for where they fit into this wider landscape?
I think it really depends, Ritz. It depends by industry. It depends by company size. It depends whether you're public or private. It depends whether or not you're growing. It depends whether or not you're profitable. There are a lot of variables at play that, quite frankly, impact culture. And depending, and the leader at the top makes a really significant impact to the culture of a company. I think if I can only speak for myself, because I think that's the only true lens that I have, it's, what are we trying to achieve here? What are we trying to accomplish? And then let's get everybody aligned with respect to that. And let's be completely transparent about it. Is it profitability? Is it profitable growth? Are we trying to move a market? Are we publicly traded? Are we getting pressure in quarterly cycles to show results against it? Do we have more time? What are we going to do in the short term versus what are we going to do in the long term? It's just that clarity. Somebody once said to me, management is communication. So it's just that clarity of vision and clarity of communication that's critical, and it varies. It varies greatly by industry, by market, by pro P&L. It varies super greatly. But I think if I were to advise somebody who's in that environment, it's know what's going on in the business. Tune in to the strategy. If it's publicly traded, listen to those earnings calls. Read the reports. If it's a private company, ask questions, inquire. If you aren't clear in terms of how your job impacts the company strategy, ask the question. What are we trying to achieve, and how can I help? And then the last thing in all this is I built a whole career on seeing problems as opportunities. Every problem is an opportunity. Every problem has upside. It's a chance to if you see it as a problem, that means there's a solution. So, that's how you build a career. That's how you build stability in your career. So that's the best way for me to answer that, Ritz.
Oh, that's good. And pushes me into this space, which is, tell us about the co-effect and how these perspectives and your wisdom actually wraps up into what you're doing now.
Yeah. So the co-effect actually houses this podcast. What I envisioned for the co-effect was really a holding company that would hold a series of different types of businesses. One of them is my coaching business. So I do coach C-level executives. I have a very different approach to coaching in that it is a corporate athlete approach. So it's a mind, body, spirit approach to coaching. So to give you perspective, one of the things that we look at when I start with someone is their blood work. Like, get a baseline physical. Let's make sure everything's okay. Let's make sure you're feeling great. We assess their emotional practices. Like, do they have a therapist? As a most basic question. We assess, do they have any spiritual practices? Whether that's a daily walking practice, a meditation practice, or something more than that. Is it a philanthropic practice? That could be a spiritual practice. So there's one arm, which is the coaching business. I also do speaking. So I have speaking engagements, and then I do consulting for businesses as well. And so the co-effect houses that, Ritz. And really, from my perspective, after 25 years of turning around businesses, I've come to realize kind of what the secret sauce is. And I've seen times when it works and when it doesn't. And there's a commonality in when it works. And that's when teams feel safe and are in love with one another, and it's a healthy environment. And that's really what the co-effect is about. And that's what this podcast is about in terms of highlighting people that are heart-led, that are doing amazing things in the world, and are doing it on their terms. And the last thing I would say, Ritz, which is really important to me, is I'm trying to open people's minds that there's another way to do things. It doesn't have to be the way it's always been. We can evolve. Work can be joyful. It can be fun. It can be full of love. It's where we spend the majority of our time. Why not enjoy it? And oh, by the way, that's when you get the best business outcomes.
Yeah, we don't have to sacrifice one for the other.
Mm-mm. It's not binary. You don't have to make the trade-off.
I think this is almost too good to be true for a lot of folks in these positions.
Yeah, it's scary. It's scary to think about because there's been this way of working, culturally that we've all adopted that is very masculine, not from a gender perspective. I will say I embodied that very masculine state of kind of like doing, executing. But there is something to be said to bring that in balance, to have more nurturing environments, to have healthier environments, to have environments where people trust one another enough that they can say, whoa, the house is on fire. This thing is broken. What do we do to fix it? From my perspective, that's a much healthier work environment where people are versus environments where people are afraid because they're not able to hit a metric and are trying to hide the fact that they can't hit it.
Yeah. I mean, I think if this is a really beautiful thing because I think this weaves back into our first question that we had, which was like, what's the legacy that you want to leave? And I think you're doing it. You're embodying the legacy.
Thank you, Ritz. That means a lot to me. I appreciate you being such a supporter and a champion of mine. Even before you decided to do work with us, you were sending me little notes of encouragement and ideas. And I just want you to know that I noticed that and I'm grateful for it.
It was all natural. Yeah, I just saw that in you and want to continue to affirm you and build you up and come alongside you and help you because I think it's a worthy endeavor. And yeah, at the end of the day, we were talking about, I think you had said the highest human act is to inspire. And so, yeah, we owe it to the beauty of the world to give it that with our time and our efforts. So thank you for allowing me to host you on your own podcast.
Great. I can't wait to hear what the community has to say about it.
This will be good. It's also, I'm going to have to hear my own voice.
Don't even start with me. You're the one that told me to get over it.
Because I was talking to you, not because I had to deal with it.
So good.
Yeah.
All right, Ritz. Well, thank you so much, my friend. And let's see where this goes.
Yeah. Thank you, Carla. Upwards and onwards.
Thank y'all for listening today. If you're so inclined, please follow, subscribe, download, share, all of the things so that we can keep going. We appreciate your support so much. If you're interested in learning more, go to thecoeffect.co.